John Mayall was a familiar face on the Manchester jazz scene. He would wander about to the various gigs and a nodding acquaintance, really. In fact, I saw him most days. At that time, I was the manager of the Sheraton Hughes University bookshop opposite to Owens College, Manchester University. And he would go past each day on his bicycle in the direction of All Saints. I think he worked in the advertising industry. All Saints, I think, has kind of been swallowed up now by Manchester University. In fact, it's the place where I got married at the All Saints Register Office, and in fact had my tonsils removed in almost the same building when I was around 21 years of age. Anyway, that's by the by. John played various instruments, piano, he sang, he would turn up sometimes with a trumpet a la Dizzy Gillespie with the bell bent up. He also was quite renowned for having parties on a Saturday night at his house where records would be played all night, all kinds of people would turn up, and general mayhem. I think his wife was a sculptress, I'm not absolutely sure, but I think so. He was also slightly renowned for liking to dress up, and one time answered the door dressed as a Zulu, and the totally nonplussed person said, "Good evening, John." Musically, the Blues Syndicate. At that time, Anna Ford, who was later a presenter on BBC and various other things like that, she was the president of the Students' Union and also the booker for bands and people who appeared in the Students' Union for entertainment. Strange as it may seem now, jazz actually was extremely popular in the universities at that time, and so jazz groups would appear very, very regularly for the Students' Union performances, not only at Manchester but nationally. I played in Leeds and various other places. Anyway, on this particular evening I was playing with a band in support of a new band called Blues Syndicate. This band, in fact, had been put together by Jack Massarik, who was a saxophone player, studying psychology, if I remember at the time. John Rowlands, who played at that time also trumpet, later became a saxophone player. Hughie Flint, the drummer. I can't remember who the bass player was. And John on piano and vocals. The intention being to do the kind of R&B repertoire which was becoming very popular. I mean, Alexis Corner and people of those kinds. Anyway, they were the main band of the evening. It was a cooperative. It wasn't founded by John Mayall. It was a cooperative. John Rowlands, in fact, ran a very successful all-night session at what became the Twisted Wheel in Manchester. Eventually he moved to Sheffield, where he did a similar thing at the Lead Mill. But that was the lineup. Jack Massarik, the late Jack Massarik, in fact, who was a friend and acquaintance over many years, was told me that, in fact, John, in fact, after no more than a couple of weeks after this gig, decided he was going to turn professional. In fact, that's what he did, and off he went to London. I think Jack played with him briefly there. Hughie Flint certainly went with him there and started to establish a career. He was a very focused individual, very, very focused. As far as I'm aware, he took care of everything in terms of the booking, the design of the jackets, of the covers, money, etc., etc. Also, I mean, some band leaders could be extremely ruthless, and I think he was fairly ruthless, that if he found somebody who he thought would enhance the reputation of the band, they would be brought in, and the other person would be moved out without much sentiment. So that was another aspect of his character. Even in later years, when he'd been highly successful, I think this kind of control over his interests, musical and business, were really, he still kept a firm hand on them. In fact, when Jack Massarik died, which I think, it was about 2014, I sent him an email to tell him that Jack had died, and he replied in person in less than 3 minutes. So he was well on the ball. It's always very interesting how some people with a certain talent, in fact, manage to pull the various aspects of success together and become successful. I'm thinking this particularly of John Mayall, because there was another blues singer on the scene called Victor Brox, who was also an extremely talented guy who never ever reached the kind of heights that John did. In fact, I'm thinking maybe I'll do a video about that at some point in time, just why some people rise and some people are quite happy to be small fish in a big fish, I should say, in a small pond. Anyway, in spite of, these kind of people, they kind of build a mythology around them, but that was in fact the origins of John Mayall as an R&B artist, an active R&B artist, and obviously out of that developed the Bluesbreakers, and we all know the story from then on. But in terms of mythology, it's quite interesting, really, because the media in particular do swallow these things. I knew the late Alex Harvey, and he went off to an interview, was asked what was one of his favourite artists, and he answered Fred Astaire, much to the astonishment, of course, of the interviewer. And in fact, the reason why this came out and popped out of his mouth was he'd been over that afternoon at the house of Derek Wadsworth, and Derek's wife Betty was an avid collector of Fred Astaire and records, and he'd seen this, and of course he just used this as a reply during the interview. So I mean, it's the factual reality was somewhat different. Anyway, there we are. So that's John's my acquaintance with John, who I knew reasonably well. The last time I actually saw him was at the Bridgewater Hall, not many years ago, and he was still bouncing around the stage. I mean, incredible, lots of energy. He always had very high quality sidemen. I mean, I can't remember the name of the guitarist, an American. I mean, he was incredible. I mean, he could have done the concert on his own, quite frankly. But he was a great showman, John Mayall. He knew how to work crowds, and the place was full of people of a certain age who were just oozing admiration and affection. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please subscribe.